"Daddy, that woman has Mommy's face," Emma whispered, her small finger pointing across the crowded gallery. Thomas froze, his coffee cup suspended midair as his eyes found her, his dead wife's perfect twin. The exhibition buzzed with the gentle hum of conversation and appreciation, but for Thomas Reed, time had suddenly stopped. His 9-year-old daughter tugged urgently at his sleeve, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hope that stabbed at his heart. "Emma, it's not polite to," Thomas began automatically, but his words died as the woman turned in their direction. The resemblance was uncanny, haunting, impossible. Same high cheekbones, same graceful neck, same subtle dimple on the right cheek. When she smiled at something her companion said. For 3 years since Olivia's death, Thomas had trained himself not to see her ghost in strangers, not to search crowds for her silhouette, not to imagine her voice in random conversations. Yet here, under the stark gallery lights, surrounded by artwork celebrating connections, the invisible threads of humanity, stood a woman who could have been Olivia's reflection. Emma pulled at his arm again, more insistently. "Daddy, look, she even smiles like Mommy." Thomas swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dessert dry. "Emma, honey, sometimes people just look similar too." "But her eyes, Daddy, they're the same special green." Emma's voice rose with excitement, drawing the attention of nearby patrons, including the woman herself. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes met across the gallery floor. Thomas saw her expression change, first friendly curiosity, then something else. A flicker of recognition. Impossible. She had never met Olivia. Olivia had died 3 years ago in a car accident that had shattered their family's world. The woman tilted her head slightly, a gesture so familiar that Thomas felt a physical pain in his chest. Then she smiled politely and turned back to her conversation. "Daddy, we have to talk to her," Emma insisted, already trying to pull him across the room. "Emma, no, we can't just." But his daughter had already slipped away, weaving through the crowd with determination. Thomas cursed under his breath and followed, apologizing as he bumped into people admiring the abstract sculptures. By the time he caught up, Emma was already standing before the woman, looking up at her with open wonder. "You look just like my mommy," Emma was saying as Thomas approached. "Even your voice sounds like hers." The woman's expression was a mixture of surprise and gentle amusement. "Oh, do I? Well, that's quite a coincidence," she replied, her voice indeed carrying the same melodic quality that had once filled Thomas's home. "I'm so sorry," Thomas said, placing his hands protectively on Emma's shoulders. "My daughter has an active imagination and a good eye." Apparently, the woman finished for him, extending her hand. "I'm Eleanor Mason, Ellie to my friends, Thomas Reed, and this is Emma." He took her hand, and the simple touch sent an inexplicable current through him. Her hand was warm, solid, real, not a ghost, not a dream. "I apologize for the interruption." Eleanor shook her head. "No apology needed. Children often see things more clearly than we do." She crouched down to Emma's level. "So I look like your mom?" Emma nodded emphatically. "You could be her twin. Daddy, show her the picture on your phone." Thomas felt heat rise to his face. "Emma, I don't think Miss Mason wants to." "Actually, I'm curious now," Eleanor said, straightening up. "If you don't mind." With reluctant fingers, Thomas pulled out his phone and found a photograph of Olivia from their last vacation together, her face radiant as she stood on a beach at sunset. He handed the phone to Eleanor, watching her face carefully. Her reaction was everything he feared and somehow hoped for. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly, and her complexion paled. She stared at the image for a long moment, then at Emma, then finally at Thomas. This is extraordinary," she whispered, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed the phone back. "I don't have any siblings that I know of." But, Thomas prompted, feeling a strange sense of vertigo. Eleanor hesitated. "I was adopted. I never knew my birth family." She smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, this must be terribly uncomfortable for you both. It's just a strange coincidence." "Olivia was adopted too," Thomas said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Something in Eleanor's expression changed. a flicker of something deeper than curiosity. Emma, ever observant, suddenly asked, "When's your birthday?" Eleanor looked startled by the question. April 18th. Thomas felt as though the floor beneath him had disappeared. That's Olivia's birthday too. The three of them stood in silence, surrounded by the buzz of the gallery, yet isolated in a bubble of shared disbelief. It was Eleanor who finally broke the silence. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere quieter," she suggested, her voice steady, despite the slight tremor in her hands. "There's a cafe across the street." 20 minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner of the cafe, cups of mostly untouched coffee growing cold between them. Emma was happily occupied with a hot chocolate topped with whipped cream that had left a small white mustache on her upper lip. So Eleanor began carefully, "Your wife Olivia. She was adopted from St. Catherine's home in Portland." Thomas nodded, still trying to process the impossible coincidence. "Yes, when she was just a few months old. She never knew anything about her birth parents. The records were sealed, and her adoptive parents didn't have much information. I was adopted from St. Vincent's in Seattle," Eleanor said, running her finger absently around the rim of her coffee cup. "But I've always felt, I don't know how to explain it, like something was missing. A piece of me that was out there somewhere." "Mommy said that too," Emma piped up, her eyes wide. "She used to say she had a hole in her heart that wasn't really a hole, but more like a missing piece of a puzzle." Eleanor's hand froze on her cup. "That's exactly how I would describe it." Thomas watched her face, looking for signs of Olivia in every expression, every gesture. It was more than just physical resemblance. It was the way she tilted her head when listening, the thoughtful pause before she spoke, even the way she absently touched her collarbone when deep in thought, all uniquely Olivia's mannerisms. "What do you do, Eleanor?" he asked, trying to ground himself in practicalities. "I'm a marine biologist," she replied. "I work primarily with conservation projects for marine mammals." Another jolt. Olivia was a wildlife photographer, specializing in marine life. Eleanor's eyes widened. I always loved photography. I have a whole collection of underwater photographs. It's just a hobby, but this is getting weird," Thomas admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Really weird. Good weird or bad weird?" Eleanor asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "I'm not sure yet," Thomas answered honestly. Emma, who had been following the conversation with unusual attentiveness for a 9-year-old, suddenly asked, "Are you my mommy's sister, like her twin sister?" The directness of the question hung in the air between them. Thomas started to gently admonish his daughter, but Eleanor's thoughtful expression stopped him. "I don't know, Emma," she answered carefully, "but I think it's a possibility worth exploring. Don't you?" Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "If you're mommy's sister, that makes you my aunt. I've never had an aunt before." The simplicity of Emma's logic brought a smile to both adults' faces, easing some of the tension that had built up. "There are ways to find out," Thomas said cautiously. "DNA tests, searching adoption records." Eleanor nodded. "I've always wanted to know where I came from, who I came from. I just never had a strong enough reason to pursue it." She glanced at Emma, then back at Thomas. "Now I do." As they exchanged contact information, Thomas felt a strange mixture of emotions. The pain of losing Olivia was still a constant companion, a shadow that never quite left his side. Yet here was this woman, this stranger with Olivia's face, and possibly her blood, offering a connection to the past he thought was forever severed. "I have all of Olivia's paperwork," he told Eleanor as they prepared to leave. "Adoption records, birth certificate, everything she managed to gather when she was trying to find her birth parents. It might help." "I'd like to see them," Eleanor replied. "And I'd like to learn more about her, about Olivia, if that's not too painful for you." Thomas considered this. Was he ready to share Olivia with someone else, to revisit those memories? But looking at Emma's hopeful face, he knew he had to try. "Come to dinner tomorrow," he found himself saying. I'll make Olivia's famous lasagna, and we can go through her things together. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Thomas sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey in one hand, and an old photo album in the other. The album was filled with pictures of Olivia, as a child with her adoptive parents, as a young woman traveling the world with her camera, as his bride, as Emma's mother. A life well lived, but cut too short.
He stared at a photograph taken on their honeymoon in Bali, Olivia laughing as waves crashed around her knees. Had she known? Somehow, had some part of her sensed that she had a twin out there, someone who shared her birthday, her features, perhaps even her talents and passions? And what did it mean for him? For Emma? Was Eleanor's appearance a chance for healing, or would it only reopen wounds that had just begun to scar over? Thomas took a long sip of his whiskey, feeling the burn down his throat. He had promised Olivia, in those final moments by her hospital bed, that he would find happiness again, that he wouldn't let grief consume him, that he would make sure Emma grew up knowing joy. He had tried. God knows he had tried, but it had been so hard to move forward when every step felt like a betrayal of what they had shared. Now, with Eleanor's appearance, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Possibly not romantically. That thought hadn't even crossed his mind, but the possibility of connection, of family, of answers to questions Olivia had carried her whole life. The next evening, Thomas found himself checking the lasagna for the 3rd time, adjusting the table settings, and self-consciously tidying the already spotless living room. Emma bounced around the house with barely contained excitement, having changed her outfit twice already. "Do you think she likes unicorns, Daddy? Everyone likes unicorns, right?" she asked, clutching her favorite stuffed unicorn that had once belonged to Olivia. "I'm sure she does," Thomas assured her, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "But remember, Emma, we're still getting to know Eleanor. She might be connected to Mommy, but she's her own person too." Emma nodded seriously. "I know, Daddy, but if she's Mommy's sister, then she's family, and family is important." Out of the mouths of babes, Thomas thought. He was about to respond when the doorbell rang, sending Emma racing to the door. Eleanor stood on the porch, looking slightly nervous, holding a bouquet of lilies and a bottle of wine. She had tied her hair back, highlighting the similarities to Olivia even more starkly. "I hope lilies are okay," she said as she stepped inside. "I had a feeling they might be significant, though I can't explain why." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. They were Olivia's favorite. "How did you?" Eleanor shook her head, looking equally unsettled. "I don't know. I was at the florist, and I just felt drawn to them." Emma tugged at Eleanor's free hand. "Come see our house, and I want to show you my room, and all the pictures of Mommy." Dinner was a strange affair, filled with moments of comfortable conversation, interspersed with startling revelation. Eleanor, it turned out, was allergic to the same foods as Olivia. She had the same unusual preference for salty foods, with sweet drinks. She even held her fork in the same peculiar way, something Thomas had teased Olivia about for years. After dinner, with Emma reluctantly in bed, after extracting a promise from Eleanor to visit again soon, Thomas brought out a box of Olivia's personal documents. "She started searching for her birth parents when she was in college," he explained, carefully spreading the papers on the coffee table. "She didn't get very far. The adoption was closed, and the agency wasn't particularly helpful." Eleanor nodded, pulling her own slim folder from her bag. "I've had similar experiences. Dead ends everywhere I turned." They compared documents side by side, looking for any connection, any overlap. Both had been born at different hospitals, adopted by different families, through different agencies, yet the coincidence of their identical birthdays and striking resemblance couldn't be ignored. "There's one thing we could do," Thomas said hesitantly, after they had exhausted the paperwork. "A DNA test would tell us definitively if you're related." Eleanor looked up from the photograph of Olivia she had been studying. "I was thinking the same thing. I actually brought this." She pulled a small box from her bag. "A home DNA testing kit. I've had it for months, but never worked up the courage to use it." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You came prepared." She smiled sheepishly. "After yesterday, I couldn't stop thinking about the possibilities." "I hope that's not too presumptuous." "Not at all," Thomas assured her. "In fact, I think it's exactly what Olivia would have done." They followed the instructions, each taking a swab and sealing it in the provided containers. Eleanor would mail them the next day, and then the waiting would begin. "It takes about 2 to 3 weeks for results," she explained, putting the kit back in her bag. "They'll email us when they're ready." As Thomas walked her to the door later that evening, a comfortable silence fell between them. It felt strange how quickly they had established a rapport, how natural it felt to share his home, his memories, his daughter with this woman who had been a stranger just days ago. "Thank you," Eleanor said, suddenly turning to face him at the door. "For dinner, for sharing Olivia with me, for being open to whatever this turns out to be. I think Olivia would have wanted this," Thomas replied honestly. "She always felt that missing piece you described. If you are her sister, knowing that you exist would have meant everything to her." Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Even if the test comes back negative, even if this is all just some cosmic coincidence, I'm glad I met you and Emma. It feels important somehow." The weeks that followed took on a strange rhythm. Eleanor became a regular presence in their lives, joining them for dinner several times, accompanying them to Emma's soccer game, even helping with a school project about marine life that had Emma beaming with pride. Thomas found himself caught between conflicting emotions. On one hand, Eleanor's presence was a constant reminder of his loss. On the other, she brought a warmth back into their home that had been missing since Olivia's death. Emma bloomed in her company, sharing stories about her mother that she had previously kept locked away. It was during one such evening, as Eleanor helped Emma build a diorama of an ocean ecosystem, that Thomas realized something important. Regardless of what the DNA test revealed, Eleanor had already become part of their family. The email came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after they had submitted the samples. Thomas was at work when his phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. "Results are in. Can I come over tonight after work?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Thomas picked up Emma early from her after-school program, explaining that they might be getting some important news about Eleanor. "Is she really Mommy's sister?" Emma asked, as they drove home, raindrops racing down the car window. "We'll find out soon," Thomas replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "But remember, Emma, no matter what the test says, how we feel about Eleanor doesn't have to change." Emma considered this, then stated with the certainty only a child could muster, "She belongs with us. I can feel it." Eleanor arrived at 7. Looking both nervous and excited. She had brought the printed results in a sealed envelope, wanting them to open it together. They sat at the kitchen table, Emma perched on Thomas's lap, as Eleanor carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the papers inside. She scanned the document, her expression unreadable, then wordlessly passed it to Thomas. The scientific language was complex, but the conclusion was unmistakable. Eleanor and Olivia shared enough genetic markers to be classified as identical twins, Thomas breathed, the word hanging in the air between them. "Separated at birth," Eleanor added, her voice barely above a whisper. "How is that even possible?" Emma, who had been trying to make sense of the document, looked up with a triumphant smile. "I knew it. You are my aunt." Eleanor laughed, a sound filled with both joy and disbelief. "Yes, Emma, it seems I am." Later, after Emma had gone to bed, reluctantly, still buzzing with excitement about her newfound aunt, Thomas and Eleanor sat in the living room, trying to process the implications of their discovery. "There are so many questions," Eleanor said, staring into her glass of wine. "Why were we separated? Did our birth parents know we were twins? Did the adoption agencies know?" Thomas nodded, his mind racing with similar questions. "Olivia would have been ecstatic. Finding you was everything she ever wanted, even if she didn't know exactly what she was looking for." "I feel like I've found a part of myself," Eleanor admitted, "but also lost something at the same time. All those years we could have known each other." "You can still know her," Thomas said gently, "through her work, her photographs, her journals, through Emma, through me." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes bright with tears. "I'd like that, to know my sister through the people who loved her most."
They fell into a comfortable silence, the rain pattering against the windows providing a soothing backdrop to their thoughts. "What happens now?" Thomas finally asked. Eleanor considered the question. "I suppose we could try to find out more about our birth parents, why we were separated. There must be records somewhere." Olivia would have wanted that. Thomas agreed. She never gave up hoping she'd find her biological family someday. "And what about us?" Eleanor asked carefully. "You, me, Emma." Thomas understood what she was asking. In the short time since Eleanor had entered their lives, something had shifted. A space that had been empty for 3 years was starting to fill again, not replacing what was lost, but creating something new alongside it. "I think," he said slowly, "that family is what we make it, and somehow, against all odds, you've become part of ours." Eleanor smiled, a smile so like Olivia's that Thomas felt a familiar ache in his chest, but it was a gentler pain now, softened by something that felt like hope. "I'd like that," she said simply. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the doorway of Emma's room, watching as Eleanor read her a bedtime story. The transformation in their lives had been both subtle and profound. Eleanor had moved from Seattle to be closer to them, taking a position at the local Marine Research Center. She had her own apartment but spent most weekends at their house, becoming the aunt Emma had never had, and a friend Thomas hadn't known he needed. Together they had managed to uncover parts of the twins' story. Their birth mother had been young and unmarried, facing societal pressure and financial constraints that made keeping twin babies impossible. The adoption agencies, working in different states, hadn't communicated about the siblings. A clerical error had obscured the fact that the girls were twins rather than simply sisters. A series of unfortunate coincidences that had kept Olivia and Eleanor apart their entire lives. Yet somehow, against all odds, Eleanor had found her way to the family she never knew she had. And Thomas and Emma had found a connection to Olivia they thought was lost forever. As Eleanor finished the story and kissed Emma goodnight, Thomas felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since Olivia's death. Life would never be the same without her, but it could still be meaningful, still be full of love and connection. Eleanor joined him in the hallway, gently closing Emma's door. "She asked me to take her tide pooling this weekend," she whispered. Apparently, it was something Olivia used to do with her. Thomas nodded, smiling at the memory. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, Olivia said it was their special time to discover hidden worlds. "Would you mind if I continued the tradition?" Eleanor asked, hesitation in her voice. "I think it's perfect," Thomas replied. "Olivia would love knowing you're sharing that with Emma." As they walked downstairs together, Thomas thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought Eleanor into their lives. Was it mere coincidence that she had been at that particular gallery on that particular day? Or was it something more, Olivia's spirit somehow guiding them together, completing the circle that life had left unfinished? He didn't have answers to these questions, but perhaps he didn't need them. What mattered was the present. This new family they were building, honoring Olivia's memory while creating new memories of their own. In the kitchen, Eleanor picked up the framed photograph they had placed on the counter. Olivia and Thomas on their wedding day, their faces alight with joy. Beside it now stood a new photograph. Eleanor, Thomas, and Emma at the beach, their first family vacation together. Sometimes I look at her pictures and it's like looking in a mirror, Eleanor said softly. Not just physically, but I see parts of myself that I never understood before. Pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Thomas touched her shoulder gently. You're not just Olivia's reflection, Eleanor. You're your own person, with your own story, but you're also part of hers, and she's part of yours. That's what family means, I think, being part of each other's stories. Eleanor smiled, placing the photograph back on the counter. I like that, being part of each other's stories. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Thomas thought of something Olivia used to say when they would stargaze together, that even the stars that had died long ago still sent their light across the universe, still touched lives with their distant glow. Perhaps that was what had happened here. Olivia's light, still traveling, had brought Eleanor to them, had completed their family in a way none of them could have imagined. And in that completion, Thomas finally understood what moving forward truly meant. Not forgetting, not replacing, but expanding, making room for new connections while honoring the ones that came before, creating a future that incorporated the past without being defined by it. As he and Eleanor settled on the porch swing to watch the stars emerge, Thomas felt a sense of rightness wash over him. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. This unexpected family, bound by blood and choice and love. A mirror of souls once lost, now found. Was Eleanor's appearance mere coincidence, or fate's design? What would you do if you met your lost loved one's twin? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more emotional journeys that connect us all. Your support brings these stories to life, one subscription, one shared moment at a time. Until next time.